Hi, this is John with the Fossil Channel, and today I'm going to go over my mono white aggro deck. It's a casual deck, and I use it in kitchen top magic. I'm going to start out with the lands here. I have started out with Strip Mine. It's not a casual card, but I do have to take out other lands that sometimes cause trouble. And I do run into Maze of Its from time to time and other dual lands that I might have to remove from an enemy player. Overall, it's just a good utility card to have in the deck, if at all. It's a really powerful card. Very annoying. I am not running Crucible Worlds or any kind of graveyard effects that return lands to the battlefield, so I'm not going to be abusing its destructive power like that. So I have one of them in the deck, and it's very effective. Either you could tap it and sack it, destroy a land, or tap to add one colorless mana to your mana pool. That is Strip Mine. Next up is a place set of Mishra's Factory. It's a land, and it adds one colorless mana to your mana pool. Or you could pay one, turn this into a 2/2 artifact creature until end of turn, and you can swing with it. Or you can, if you have more than one out, or if there's more than one out on the table, you can tap this one to give a target assembly worker 1/1 until end of turn. So you can make your other 2/2 into a 3/3 as a combat effect, and you can use it on itself if it has vigilance and you want to save it. So it's got a lot of interesting abilities. This land card, I like it a little bit better than Mutavault or Ink Moth. In some cases, in this case, would be for strictly the aggro and pushing damage through and pumping up. So that is Mishra's Factory. Next colorless land I have here is Corehaven. Legendary land. Tap add one colorless mana to your mana pool. Tap one white and one of any color, and then you tap Corehaven. It says prevent all combat damage that would be dealt by target attacking creature this turn. So I can stem the flow of damage coming in with this card and not suffer, like, say, Infect. I can win on trades. It's just a great card. I would have put Maze of Ith in here, but I needed to be able to generate mana first and foremost. So the mana thing is the main concern for why I'm running Corehaven as opposed to Maze of Ith. That being said, great card. It suffers obviously from Wasteland and Blood Moon and Back to Basics and Press of Progress. So, typical non-basic land stuff. But Corehaven, good card. Next up, we're getting to the color matter. Starting out with one card of Flagstones of Trocare. I'm only running one in the deck because I have one of these lying around, and I do use balance in the deck, and I do fight against decks that have balance, and I have one available Flagstones, so I figured that couldn't hurt. What it does is it's a legendary land. It comes into play, and when it taps to add one white mana. When this is put into a graveyard from play, you may search your library for a Plains card and put it into play tapped. If you do, shuffle your library. So obviously with balance, I'll sack this, I'll get my mana back, and I can pull out ahead of the other players. Or if they do it to me, I can still have some sort of resiliency to land destruction. So that's Flagstones of Trocare. Next up is another legendary land. This legendary land is Egandra Castle. And what it does is you tap to add one white mana to your mana pool, or you tap one white mana and this card, prevent the next 2 damage to be dealt to target legendary creature this turn. I use that on my legendary creatures and my partners, so it kind of extends the overall tricks of this deck with the land base without it being modified too much into colorless mana and coming into play tapped mana. So Egandra Castle makes it very flexible. I do run a number of legendary creatures in this deck. After that, we have 15 basic planes. So, obviously, running planes in mono white deck. High mana cost creatures sometimes require a lot of mana. I do run some high casting cost creatures in this deck, so I wanted to keep the land count pretty high at 23, or moderate rather. Next up, we're going to go over the creatures. I have a play set of Mother of Ruins, everybody's favorite annoying card to deal with. I use this card a lot in my Death and Taxes deck, my Legacy deck, but here I'm not running any Aether Vials. I'm just purely pinning it out. What it does is it's one white mana, it's a 1/1 creature. Tap. Target creature you control gains protection from a color of your choice until end of turn. Obviously, that's a very powerful effect if it can get online and run. I've won games off this card. You can install a board. You can push damage through. The only drawback is that it's a 1/1, so it suffers from Dread of Night and other -1/-1 effects. You can easily wipe it, or somebody could target you and make you sack it, like Black does with Diabolical Edict or Gatekeeper Malachi. That being said, in an aggro deck, this really pushes damage through. It's a hate bear. I love it. Really good card. Another interesting card, which is somewhat annoying, is Figure of Destiny. Now, it's a great early, great mid, and great late game card. It's either 1 red or 1 white, so you can spend either or on this. It's a 1/1, it's a Kithkin, and it has a couple of functions and abilities on it. The first function is you pay 1 red or white. Figure of Destiny becomes a 2/2 Kithkin Spirit. Second ability, you pay 3 red or white mana in any combination. If Figure of Destiny is a spirit, it becomes a 4/4 Kithkin Spirit Warrior. Third ability, you can pay either 6 red or white in any combination. If Figure of Destiny is a warrior, it becomes an 8/8 Kithkin Spirit Warrior avatar with flying and first strike. So you can see the potential for this as a top deck onto the battlefield. You can get back into the swing of pushing damage. Interesting to note, if you're on any of the levels above the first level, you can retroactively turn it back into its previous level. So let's say if it's a 8/8 Kithkin Spirit Warrior avatar with flying and first strike, I can pay 1 red or white and turn it into a 2/2 Kithkin Spirit and go back up the progress. Why you would do that? There's some cards out there that destroy creatures with a high toughness or high power, or there's certain artifacts like Meekstone, which means you can't untap your creature. Well, with this, you can get by it and push damage through again. So it's a very flexible card, great late game changer, and it really fits well in this home of an aggro deck that I have here. So I do have a moderate amount of mana, and it's a good mana sink. Next up is the 2 converted mana cost slot, starting out with a pair of Knight of Middlegrains. It's 2 white mana, Kithkin Knight, first strike, lifelink, and a 2/2. So it's a great body, great effect, and it does hold off damage from coming in, and you can push damage with it, and it gains you life at the same time. So potentially a 4 life point difference each time you connect with it on an opponent's health. So very, very good card, very low mana cost, very effective. Great card. I use it, and it has won me certain amounts of games just off the back of this card and pumping it up. So that is Knight of Middlegrain. Next up, I have a split of single cards coming up. I have 1 Knight of White Orchid in the deck. I have another one in the sideboard, and I tend to rotate that out if I want to draw more lands, or if I'm trying to maintain a stable mana base, I'll switch it out. But what Knight of White Orchid does is it's 2 white, it's a 2/2 first strike, so it's got a decent body and ability for its mana cost. When this comes into play, if an opponent controls more lands than you may search your library for a Plains card and put it into play, then shuffle your library. So this can really help your tempo game on the resource end and put you ahead, or if not ahead, on even terms. So this is a great little card to use to catch up with the enemy player. Other than that, it's just standard hate bear with first strike. Next up is a annoying card. I do have another one of these in the sideboard as well, hence why I went with the split. Sometimes I like more utility in my deck than straight up one precise card, so, or card type rather. This is Grand Abolisher. It's 2 white. It's a 2/2 creature, so it's a basic creature. It's nothing to write home about for its cost and power and damage, or toughness rather. So what it says though, it's during your turn, your opponents, more than one, can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. Now that's very important, because this allows you to get through the obvious web net of counter spells and battlefield effects or combat tricks. So you can really stall out a control deck with this. This is a control card. Very effective. I like this. I want to say I've had better luck with this in multiplayer than Knight of White Orchid, because this extends over and not only benefits me, but my partner in Two-Headed Giant if we're playing Two-Headed Giant Kitchen Table Magic. So that is Grand Abolisher. Really great card if you want to control the battlefield and have some protection. Next up, I do have a pair of Exalted Angels. Much like my mono white angel deck, I'm putting this in here for the same purpose. I'm not putting it in here for the 6 mana casting cost, but rather the morph ability on it. It takes 2 white and 4 of any color to cast. It's a flying 4/5, so it's an okay body and ability. But whenever it deals damage, you gain that much life. So that is not the same as lifelink, but it still enables you to push into late game. You just got to be careful that the triggering effect, you don't die before the effect resolves. But what I'm running it in here for is the morph ability. Now what that means is you pay 3 mana of any color. It comes into play face down as a morph creature. It's a 2/2 creature. That's it. No color associated with it. In order to flip it up, you're going to have to pay 2 white and 2 of any color. So by turn 4, in theory, I can be swinging with a 4/5 that's going to give me some life. So that's going to do some serious damage. So on the ramp up speed, that takes up the 3rd mana slot of my deck. That's what I consider it as, even though it's a 6 casting cost creature. Next up, I have a playset of Baneslayers, because that card is just ridiculous, and it's probably the best 5 slot that I can think of for this deck that I'm running. I have one, like in my mono angel deck, I've won games with this card. It's 5/5, flying, first strike, lifelink, protection from demons and dragons, 2 white, 3 of any color to cast. It's just a powerhouse. I'm running Soul Ring and Mana Vault in this deck too, so I still get that turn 2 Mana Vault Baneslayer on the table. Fun shenanigans. Although that's not very consistent, it does sometimes tend to work out that way. So that's Baneslayer Angel. That's why I have it in my mono white deck. Coming up are a bunch of legendary creatures that I have. One of them is Mikaeus the Lunarch. He's an interesting legendary creature. He's 1 white and X. So when Mikaeus enters the battlefield with X, 1/1 counters on it. So if you pay 1 white and 2 colorless or 2 whatever, you're going to get 2 counters on him. What he does is, in his second ability, is tap him, put a 1/1 counter on Mikaeus. So you can pump him up. His third ability on here is remove a counter, +1/+1 counter from him, and put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. Now that's important because in my deck I have a couple of the cards that give other creatures +1/+1 counters, and they get special effects from that. So very powerful card if you can have them stabilize and survive. The trick is, the tapping, when to add on a counter or remove a counter. So that's Mikaeus. Really fun card to use in this deck. Another card that works well with Mikaeus, if you can manage to keep Mikaeus at a low power and toughness, this card will work fine with that. This is Anafenza, Kintree Spirit. She's 2 white mana to cast. It's a 2/2. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, bolster 1. That means choose a creature with the least toughness among creatures you control and put a +1/+1 counter on it. So if I have Mikaeus out and I cast this, it resolves. Or if I cast another creature and he's my lowest guy, what I'm going to do is in response to the casting, I'm going to tap this, remove a counter from him, put a bunch of counters on all my other creatures. Or rather, when the creature enters the battlefield and this triggers, I'll do that too. Sometimes if I can get away with having that creature survive, or if I think it's going to, if something's going to happen. But that's the idea between these 2 cards is I get counters on him, and then I get it off of him and put it onto my other creatures, all my other creatures. So this kind of acts as a system to keep this guy up and running, which is a lot of fun. So that's why I have this card, Anafenza, in the deck. Next one is Brimaz, King of Oreskos. In the 3 mana slot, I find he's just efficient. He obviously dies to removal, like most creatures in my deck die, but he's 2 white, 1 of any color. He's a 3/4, so right there, that's a better body for the mana cost. He has Vigilance. All right, so that's over the edge. Now what he does is, whenever Brimaz attacks, you can put a 1/1 white cat soldier creature token with vigilance onto the battlefield attacking. So you get an extra poker that has vigilance attacking with you. His third ability is whenever he blocks a creature, put a 1/1 white cat soldier creature token, also with vigilance, onto the battlefield, blocking that creature. So you can really stall the game board with this guy and start making tokens and pushing through. If it survives, it puts a lot of pressure on the other players. And I found that with this deck and the amount of tricks that I have, it fits in perfectly with what I want to do. So that's Brimmas, King of Reskos. Next one is an equally annoying card. It's Linvala, Keeper of Silence. Much like my mono white angel deck, she fits in this deck pretty well. She's 2 white, 2 of any color, legendary creature angel, flying 3/4, so decent body and ability. What she does is activate abilities of creatures your opponents control can't be activated. So that shuts down Deathrite Shaman, Lanowar Elves, Grim Lavamancer, Mother Runes. So you got a lot of different things this card shuts down, and it's just perfect in my aggro deck. It fits very well. It stalls the game and it slows it down on their end while allowing me to put out and advance my plan. So that's Linvala, Keeper of Silence. I like the fact that she's also flying, so I can push damage and evade other blockers with her. The next one is sort of a interesting testing card I have in the deck. It's Michiko Kanda, Truth Seeker. She's 1 white and 3 of any color. Legendary creature, 2/2. So the body's not great for the casting cost. However, what I'm using her for is what she says here. Whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to you, that player sacrifices a permanent. So it's sort of like a mind game card. Like, I want to be attacking at all times with this deck. So I want to make sure that my best offense is a good defense. So if they hit me, yes, I'm going to lose life, but I do have life gain to gain it back. However, they're going to pay a price for it, and this card ensures that. So it basically, it's another removal magnet. So if I want to keep pushing damage with my 4/4, I don't mind losing the 2/2 because of what it says. It's sort of, to me, it's more like a card that fakes out, or rather, it's a decoy. So that's what I'm using it for primarily. I mean, it's obviously beneficial for that clause in the card. I have used it before in another deck, and it instantly eats removal. So I figured it could work well in this deck. Coming up, we have some Planeswalkers. This one works very well in this deck. It's got good synergy. This is a Johnny Goldmane, the original Planeswalker. It's 2 white and 2 of any color. Your first ability, it comes in with 4 loyalty. First ability, add a loyalty counter. You gain 2 life. Second ability, -1 loyalty counter. Put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. That's extremely powerful with the Anafenza and the Mikaeus, because then I can just recharge Mikaeus and keep putting more counters on my creatures, so they get stronger and stronger. So if I have a bunch of tokens that I've made with Brimmas out, this works very nicely with that. And they have vigilance too until the turn, so I can maintain a defensive posture. So it really pushes the efficiency of vigilance. Its last ability, -6 loyalty counters. Put a white avatar creature token into play. This creature's power and toughness are each equal to your life total. So that's an interesting little trick to use. I have used that to try to finish games. I do find the lack of trample or evasive mechanic like flying or unblockability to be a problem. So people can just stall the huge creature token coming at them. So I generally don't use the last ability in this deck. I use his first ability, and more often than not, the second ability on this card to really push damage through. So that is a Johnny Goldmane. Next one is Elspeth, Knight Errant. One of my favorite Planeswalkers ever made. It's 2 white, 2 of any color. Comes with 4 loyalty counters. The first ability is +1 loyalty. Put a white soldier creature token into play. A 1/1 white. So you can make tokens with this and push damage through. The other second ability is also a plus ability, which is nice about this card. Target creature gets 3/3 and gains flying until end of turn. So its other ability, other than defending itself, is to give one of your creatures flying, and evasive mechanic, and a serious boost. So I can take any of my tokens with vigilance and push damage through. So that is extremely useful on this card. This card just amps up that game plan much more. So she fits very well in this deck. The last ability is remove 8 loyalty counters. For the rest of the game, artifacts, creatures, enchantments, and lands I control are indestructible. Now, I've used that with the Veneral's Disc, which is a really, really hard combo to get past. Because if I'm not mistaken, Veneral's Disc, you don't sack it, you destroy it due to its ability. But however, if it's indestructible, it's like a reset button each time. So Elspeth fits in nicely as a hidden little synergy there. And I do run the Veneral's Disc in this deck too. Moving along, we have some enchantments come up. I have a pair of Aura of Silence. Now this is a unique card in that it destroys artifacts and enchantments. It's 2 white, and 1 of any color, and it has another clause on it. So what it reads is, artifact and enchantment spells cost target opponents an additional 2 to play. They changed the original text from opponent to opponents in the newer cards. So the older cards will say target opponent when it really means opponents in the updated text. So it'll cost them an additional 2 to play. So any artifact or enchantment spells, it's going to slow them down. So if they're looking for an answer for your creature cards, this card's going to really slow down immensely the other players. And it affects all opponents. Its last ability is the removal part, like I mentioned in the beginning. It says sacrifice Aura of Silence, destroy target artifact or enchantment. So it functions as a removal for me. And that's generally what I use it for. Although it's a lot slower than, say, Disenchant or Slithering Growth. Next up is a interesting flex card slot again. It's Heliod, God of Sun. 1 white, 3 of any color. Legendary enchantment creature god. It's a 5/6. However, it's not a creature right away. There's a caveat to it. It's indestructible, which is nice. As long as your devotion to white is less than 5, Heliod isn't a creature. Basically, devotion is each white in the mana cost of permanent you control counts towards your devotion to white. So if I have 2 Baneslayer Angels out and this card out, then I have 5. That means this turns into a creature. If I have less than 5, it's not going to be a creature. It's just going to be enchantment. Other creatures I control have vigilance. That's important when I'm running tokens and I want to defend myself and my planeswalkers. So that really pushes home the defensive, offensive ability. And then the last part on this is 2 white mana and 2 of any color. Put a 2/1 white cleric enchantment creature token onto the battlefield. That is very useful if you're trying to put out more defensive, and if this is not a creature, you can at least make creatures from it, which is nice. So it's worked very well in this deck. I found that it's performed very, very, very well against my friends and in my play group. Next up, we're coming up to the sorceries. I run 1 balance, which is not really balanced at all, but it's 1 white, 1 of any color. Like in my angel deck, I'm using balance in this deck. Whichever player has more lands in play, they must discard enough lands of his or her choice to equalize the number of lands both players, or the player with the least amount, has in play. Next, equalize the cards in hand, then creatures in play the same way. Creatures lost in this manner are considered buried. Rather, it's been changed to sacrifice. So this card gets around indestructibility, hexproof, anything that could potentially be a problem from basic destruction or damage removal. So that is balance. The next one is a single of Wrath of God. 2 white, 2 of any color. All creatures in play are buried. So it destroys everything with the possibility of regenerating. And fighting against green decks, that card is a catch-all against them, and it works very well. It's a classic white card. Next, coming up, we have 4 Swords of Plowshares. Tap 1 white. It's an instant. Remove target creature from the game. the creature's controller gains life equal to the power. That could potentially be a problem with me because I'm pushing damage and I don't want them gaining life, causing them to last longer and slow the game down. Now, I don't like the idea of using Path to Exile and giving them a basic land. I find that is equally troubling. I'd rather have them have more life in general than more land than me, or getting more land to further push their own game plan. So that is Swords of Plowshare, one of the best removal in the game. I have a playset of those. Next is the typical Soul Ring, 1 colorless, tap, add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. It's an artifact, great card. It just gains you so much mana when you play it, and if it stays on the battlefield, it's going to really advance your plans pretty well. And I almost always run that in tangent with the Mana Vault. So you can see in most of my decks I have a similar building construct in terms of casual decks. I usually like to pack Soul Rings and Mana Vaults in my decks, and this deck is no exception. So this is 1 mana, tap to add 3 colorless mana to your mana pool. If this doesn't untap normally during your untap step, during your upkeep you have to pay 4 mana. If you don't, this remains tapped and it deals 1 damage to you. So it can hurt you, but like I said earlier, I can play Baneslayer off this turn 2, and I don't really care about the 1 damage to me because I can make up for that later on. Especially if the Baneslayer happens to stick on the battlefield. So Mana Vault, extremely powerful and useful. Last card is also a common card in most of my decks. It's Niven Aroused Disc. It's 4 of any color. Pay 1, tap this card, destroy all enchantments, all creatures, enchantments, and artifacts in play, including this disc itself. It comes into play tapped though, so you can't use it the turn you put it out unless you have some way of untapping it. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this card with Elspeth's final ability, where everything's indestructible of yours, almost every permanent that you have, this card will work very well in terms of sticking around and resetting the board until somebody removes it or makes you sacrifice it or gains control of the card. So that is the main aggro deck there. The sideboard here is a little bit different. It's flexible, so I'm still working on it. But I have 1 Elixir of Immortality. I usually run Graveyard Recursion cards against mill because I do fight that in my casual games. This is 1 of any color. Tap 2 of any color. Tap this artifact. You gain 5 life. Then you shuffle this card and your graveyard into your library. So it's a good reset button for your graveyard to get your cards back. In my case, I do need to get some cards out of the graveyard sometimes. And this kind of helps with that. So, and it does gain me life, which is a good side benefit. 5 life for 2 mana isn't a bad trade-off. Next card is Reese the Redeemed at 1 green or white. It's a 1/1 creature. Legendary. It has 2 abilities. You tap 1 green or white, and then 2 of any color. You tap him. He puts a 1/1 green and white elf warrior creature token into play. That's kind of useful for a guy with 1 mana cost. He's a mana sink, basically. His second ability is tap 2 green or white mana and 4 of any color, and you tap him. It says for each creature token you control, put a token into play that's a copy of that creature. So if I'm running a deck that makes tokens and creatures and pumps them up, this makes sense to run it because it can definitely boost that battle plan. Although this is not strictly a token deck, I do benefit from making tokens, and I do make tokens in the deck, so he makes sense at a 1 mana cost creature with a lot of abilities. So I use him in the deck. I switch him out and in depending on what I'm playing against. Next up is the 2 slot. I have the Knight of White Orchid again and Grand Abolisher again here. Again, I switch these in and out depending on what decks I'm fighting. So obviously, just want to have a little bit more consistency. So that's why I'm running those there, and I'm running a split. The next 2 mana one is good against discard and burn usually, if I can keep it alive. It's called the Aegis of the Gods. It's 1 white, 1 of any color. It's a 2/1 enchantment creature, human soldier, and its ability says I have hexproof. I used to run True Believers, but those were, as a difference, they were 2 white to pay instead of 1 white and 1 colorless. I do run a certain amount of colorless land in this deck, so sometimes it's a little bit harder to cast the 2 white cost cards. This is a little bit easier to cast, so I went with this. So obviously very, very useful when you're fighting things that target you. I plan on replacing one of these with Shillelagh, Voice of Plenty, when it comes out. Next up is a pair of Leonin Arbiters. I'm not searching for anything in my deck, and I do know that a lot of people tend to play search effects like fetch lands and whatnot. This card is really nice to have to hose that ability on other decks, and it can actually slow them down enough for me to get the killing blow in early game. So it's 1 white mana, 1 of any color. It's a 2/2, and its special thing that has is players can't search libraries. Any player may pay 2 mana for that player to ignore this effect until end of turn. So that's extremely useful in denying people from, let's say, tutoring for things, or cracking a fetch land, or in some cases, one of my friends runs a blue deck that has bribery, so now he has to pay an extra 2 mana to search my deck to do that. So this card is a good defense against that. Next up, in continuing with that theme of denying searching, I'm running a pair of Avian Mind Sensors. I run this in my Death and Taxes deck, and it's pretty effective there. What I like about it is that it's 1 white and 2 of any colors, and it's a 2/1. It has flash, which means you can cast it anytime you can cast it instant. It has flying, so it has evasion. So that's okay. That's decent. And it's about evens out for its casting cost. But the important part on this card is, if an opponent would search a library, that player searches the top 4 cards of that library instead. So this really restricts people from searching the library just to the 4 cards, and that's really a nice thing to have, and it can shut down fetch lands really well. I've won some legacy games in my Death and Taxes deck off this card, stopping and blanking a fetch land from being used effectively. So I've run a pair in here to complement the Leonin Arbiters, and it's effectively like a play set of searching denial. Next is a singleton of Pithing Needle. 1 colorless mana. As Pithing Needle enters the battlefield, name a card. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So you want to be careful. If you name a land that makes mana, it can still make mana. If you name Lotus Petal, it can still make mana. However, if you name a fetch land, they can't crack it. So again, going with the plan of stopping people with fetches and or planeswalkers or Mother Runes. This card is a great card. It's very flexible, hits a lot of targets, and it does see a lot of play in Legacy. I do run it in my Legacy decks too. So that's Pithing Needle. Next up is probably one of the least popular swords, Sword of Body and Mind. I don't have any other artifacts in my deck that I would pit into this deck as of yet. I want to get Fire and Ice to throw in here. I do have it in my Legacy decks, but I don't have any more copies, so I just threw this in here just to have make creature tokens, really. I don't like the milling part necessarily on here, but this is 3 mana, artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets 2/2 and has protection from green and blue. So that can be very relevant, and when you're fighting down green decks, I'll side it in, or blue decks. Whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield, and that player puts the top 10 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Equip cost 2. So you can help out if you're doing 200 giant and you have a friend that's doing mill. You can use this, throw this in the deck, and I can supplement that. Otherwise, I'm not a fan of putting cards in the graveyard unless it's dedicated graveyard removal and mill. So I'm not really a big fan of the mill part, but the green token creature is a nice bonus to that, and the pro green and pro blue. I mean, I'm running Mother Runes, but to have it on a card where I don't have to keep tapping and using another card to give it protection is pretty useful. So that's sort of Body and Mind. Next up, I have a singleton enchantment of Oblivion Ring. It's 1 white and 2 of any color. Enchantment. When this comes into play, it triggers an ability. It says, remove another target non-land permanent from the game. When this leaves play, return that removed card to its owner's control into play. So that is Oblivion Ring. Great catch-all card. You can get rid of planeswalkers, anything that's annoying. It can permanently remove tokens. So Oblivion Ring, 3 mana cost. It's not bad. I sometimes swap that out with the Aura of Silences, or augment it depending on what I'm fighting. Another card of Wrath of God, just so I can have more consistency if I'm fighting if I'm fighting a creature deck that has more creatures than me. I generally have a better post-board presence than token decks or swarm decks or little weenie decks. So another Wrath of God in there to wipe them out. Last card in the deck is an odd fit. It doesn't really, it doesn't synergize that well. However, it's Karn. It's 7 of any color. Karn Liberated. It's a Planeswalker. His +4 loyalty ability. It comes with 6 loyalty counters, but his +4 is target player exiles a card from his or her hand. So I can kind of play around with a little bit of hand manipulation. His second ability, -3 loyalty counters, which is the one I use more often. Exile target permanent. This helps me deal with enemy lands, planeswalkers, Mother Ruins. There's a Metalcraft Etch Champion. This helps me with that. So if I'm fighting things like that, Karn Liberated can really change that, and I can get through. His last ability, remove 14 loyalty counters, restart the game, leaving in exile all non or permanent cards exiled with Karn Liberated, then put those cards onto the battlefield under your control. So each thing that you exile with this card, you will get back into your control by restarting the game. So this could function in theory. If you're losing the game, you could use its ability, restart the game. I mainly use it for its -3. So, and I rarely do put it in the deck because it's 7 mana cost. It's a high cost. Unless I'm doing like Tron, I'm not going to be really using this card. So I might actually end up taking it out. I just like the utility of the card, and that's why it's in the sideboard.